I want to introduce you to my friend, Daniel Darst, who is the CMO and curator of an incredibly old but resilient and vital brand, Flagstar Bank. So Daniel, are we here today? Or there you are, Daniel. And I'll be talking with Daniel later on today. But I think it's a great way to kick off the program. And let's get rolling, Daniel. I have books for everybody. I've got classes. If you want to sleep at night, please just look me up. I'm right over here.
Thanks, Steve. Sorry, I'm a little timing this a little late here. But here. So first I need to catch my breath. So I want to start by saying Steve's introduction was really good, but there are a couple of things I want to disabuse you from. The brand isn't that old. The brand's like a year and a half. And that's what I'm going to talk about. The name is old. The name's not even that old. The legacy companies that we organized and merged to become what we are now goes back to the 1850s. But I'm going to talk about, what I really want to talk about is sort of the modern, some of the issues that I think we in marketing deal with all the time. And I'd sort of summarize it in sort of the bias towards short-termism. And, oh, look at this, thanks. The bias towards short-termism and the sort of distraction of the present. And this has a lot to do with how marketing budgets are looked at, how marketing is valued. I think sort of the over-engineering of the marketing funnel, lower funnel focus, middle funnel becoming increasingly obscured, and upper funnel becoming almost disappeared. So give me a second to kind of get myself together. So I use these cards. Probably some of you who have been around a while have been through different coaching protocols. And I've been through a bunch, when you change jobs and stuff. And I had a coach when I was leaving JP Morgan and going to Neuberger Berman, and she was awesome. And she said, like my favorite way of doing organization for executives is index cards. And I was like, oh, so antediluvian, so old-fashioned. Like, who uses index cards? Because I had, I had a whole bunch of apps. And at the end of the day, I found that index cards work really well. So just let me sort through. Here we go. This is what I wanted. Okay, and now the fun begins. I get you. So this is a great picture of Steve, and let's just give a round of applause for Steve. I've gotten to know him over the last couple of months, and super smart, predictably, great personality, and really pulls these things together. Let me see if I do this the right way. Yeah. So there, no, here we go. Wait, I feel like I'm in the wrong pattern here. You're going to give me, all right. So the topic, the title that I came up with is One Brand, 5 Generations. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about the integrity of branding. So guys, you're going to bring me up to the top. Is this good? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about preferences versus principles. And again, I think the idea that I think is lost a lot today is the short-termism. So this idea of what's the principle of the company you work for? What's the principle, not just of the brand, but sort of the value proposition you're trying to deliver to your customer? What I've seen happen, and I've worked at like 6 places, they've all been pretty much blue chip places. The most successful marketing, advertising, lead generation, client engagement, client retention programs that I've been associated with have to do when you have a real story and you stick with the story, you work through what some of the biases of your audiences are, and you're able to adjust and flex. But if the continuity and the sort of essential DNA of the brand of the company is meaningful, is built on some principles of value to the client, the way the company organizes, what it believes in. And I'm not just talking about the logo or the tagline. It becomes the culture, and it makes it much more easy or much more effective and much more efficient to organize your marketing budget, lower funnel, middle funnel, and upper funnel, because you're basically working from a solid base. So this is what we're going to talk about. So I'm starting with this slide just because it's sort of a funny slide. I work for a large bank. I'm assuming most of you don't know Flagstar, and I won't go into great detail, but Flagstar is a really awesome, newly organized company coming out of the ashes of an almost ruinous merger between Flagstar, the mortgage company in Detroit, New York Community Bank in Long Island, Hicksville. Then we bought Signature Bank, which was a sort of high-end commercial private bank. We almost failed. Steve Mnuchin, you recognize that name? Steve Mnuchin and his private equity associates came in and bought us. And it's been fantastic. They brought in talent. They brought in people who understand what success looks like. They understand what excellence is. And I'm really privileged to be part of this organization. One of the things I do is I deal with consumer banking all the time. So in consumer banking, if you look at a picture of these guys, you'd be like, man, these guys, they're never going to switch accounts, right? Because they're quote unquote old. They're set in their ways. They're not digital. They're looking for things. They're all with Chase and Citi and, TD, Capital One and so forth. My point here is that there's, just because you hit 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, doesn't mean you lose your mojo. You don't lose your game. So one of the things that we found, both in research and in actual practice, by offering products, by triggering different emotional cues, is that people at different ages respond to different things that you might not expect. I used to be an adjunct lecturer at Yale School of Organization and Management, and one of the things we did, I taught these courses on branding. This was when I was at Citigroup. And one of the things we did is we do these surveys with these like hipster, really smart people. And there was this incredible bias against age. And I sort of took that with me. I could go into that in a different speech, but a lot of the people you're looking at here are digitally sophisticated or very savvy. They use, they're online all the time on their phones. They're online. They're looking at things. They want control. They want advice and so forth. But writing off huge swaths of people is a huge mistake. In retail banking, perhaps an opportunity to be a little contrarian is to say, let's look at the 60 to 75-year-old segment as switchers. Let's focus on them, because what are these people going to do? So the wisdom would be, well, you want the 25-year-old who just graduated college and is moving into a good job because he or she is a Henry, high earning potential. But the reality is these guys have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 that sits in their operating cash that they're going to move over. The Henry has, $273, and then he gets his next paycheck. So there are lots of different ways to look, and I think the stereotypes and the the genericized hypotheticals that marketers get hung up on become the Bible. I'm going to try to disabuse us of that. Then you look at her and you say, oh, she's 27, she's kind of cool, she's in fashion, but she might be extremely conservative. She might be looking for a personal relationship. She might not feel secure. She might have issues with security. She might have personal issues with her, exposing herself digitally online. But at the same time, the typical marketing today, the engineers who really drive marketing, the techie guys who really have become marketing dominant, would look at her and say, oh, she's our target, because her potential is huge. She's totally digital. She doesn't want a one-to-one relationship. Let's build out product, and let's build out marketing flows, customer things for her. This guy, well, he's corporate, right, because he has a tie. So we launch into a set of assumptions about these groups. And I think those sets of assumptions really help the marketing organizations that serve clients like me stay in business because there's always an excuse. You say, well, we were testing A versus B versus C, and we didn't really, we had I'm going to talk about this more later. We had a tiny uptick in version B, so that means this works. My point is that these are really complex, multifaceted, interesting people who have different preferences, analog, digital. They want assurances, but they want to sample lots of things, They want to do it all themselves, but they also crave advice. And you see that with people who are 60, 75, 40, 20, and so forth. I just love these pictures. That's why I really put them in here. People are emotional. Money is emotional. Even if you're broke, particularly if you're broke, money's emotional. If you're really wealthy, money's emotional. Those of us who work with private clients, who work with wealthy people, who work with corporations, larger institutions, sovereign wealth funds, you understand, people really pay attention to every penny, to every dime. Money's an emotional activity. Treating people like this is just a digital, automated engagement, that the customer experience is just going to be a series of onboarding steps. We're going to offer you our debit card. 3 weeks later, we're going to offer you a sweep into a money market. 2 weeks later, we're going to offer you something online. Really loses the essence of the people. So my point here is that people really make a difference. This is a picture of my teenage children. But the reality is, this is a picture of me, and I think a lot of you guys. So I think I'm really a little different, I don't think I do this, but I do this all the time. So I took a train in from my home in Connecticut, and I probably spent 98% of the time either on my phone, on my iPad, or on my work computer. And the investment banker sitting next to me, same thing, and all the other people around me, we're all on our phones. So part of this idea of one brand, 5 generations is saying, this exists. It's not, there are no silver bullets. It's not like you do one thing for boomers, and one thing for the silent generation, one thing for millennials, one thing for Gen X, one thing for Gen Z. It's that you have to be savvy. You have to be sort of a heterodox. You got to think about different things when you're working. So let's get into a couple of ideas. This is not a lecture. This is really based on experience. And believe me, the things I'm saying, you might look at me and say, not only is this guy incredibly interesting, but he's done all these successful things. None of this is easy to do. I wish the world were simpler, and I wish I could sort of say, yeah, this is exactly what I did at Flagstar, and before at M&T I did this, and at Neuberger. Investment management's a lot easier, but at the banks, this is what you did. Principles are the deep architecture. Preferences are surface signals. So I would maintain, I was at a dinner yesterday, I was at a conference yesterday. It was mostly marketing, tech people, mostly engineers. And as I said, there's a $1 billion industry of selling tech solutions based on preferences, based on aesthetics, based on a short attention span, based on, this is the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. My point here is that real marketing, real brand, the things that are going to sustain a client for ultimate longer lifetime value are the deeper principles. But it creates structural tension. So if you're a marketing person, like most of us I assume are, there's always this issue because most of the things I do, I'm ultimately looking to the CFO, the CEO, or the head of the business. And this is the banks. Flagstar got 7,000 people, $100 billion bank. I think it's the 18th largest bank now in America. They're looking for short-term results, an attribution period of 1 minute, not even a month, not even 2 months. So there's a structural tension because you want to say, look, if we invest in the upper funnel, if we invest in some brand, if we invest in some meaning to our brand, it's going to have a lift effect over time, and that lift effect is going to really endure. But then if somebody from the CFO's office says, listen, dude, I need 30 million more in a short-term high yield fund now. You take your dollar and you put it in lower funnel, you do performance ads, you measure the performance ads, and we can talk about AI and how you do that, and you get that $30 million bump, and you're a hero till the next time we change rates. So that's the structural tension. This is a picture of how I think I felt my entire adolescence getting into this business. It's oh my God, why are things so tough? Full funnel or full fail? So I started doing this kind of stuff in the mid-90s, and like we didn't call it brand, we called it a corporate identity. And we didn't even call it corporate identity, just like who we stood for. I was fortunate, my first real job was for Smith Barney, which those of you who are old enough remember. Smith Barney had a great reputation, a great brand. We had this awesome advertising campaign, which created a halo effect with John Houseman saying at Smith Barney, they make money the old-fashioned way, they earn it. So the world was Merrill Lynch and Smith Barney. We eventually bought Citibank and became Citigroup. So there wasn't even a question about what our brand was, what it was doing, or the effect. So when we bring out a new product, whether it's an investment product, a planning product, an estate product, a trust product, or banking product, or lending product, it had the benefit of the halo of a Smith Barney brand. But the world I live in, and I would guess most of you live in, is a world about clicks. So I mentioned just earlier how, we're sort of in this tyranny of short-termism. I know that every morning, and you don't have to raise your hand, but I'm guessing a lot of you, I get a report. I get like 5 different reports that are automated, that are AI generated, that show what kind of clicks we've had on different campaigns, on different digital assets, where there's abandonment on a flow, and how we're doing in terms of new accounts opening, and then more importantly, new accounts that are funded. And, there are people, colleagues of mine, people on my team, people adjacent to me in the bank, their whole life is basically just tracking this day-to-day optimization of clicks. Are we doing okay? Are we doing okay? The third point here is my favorite, or sort of trenchant point, is a weak brand undercuts conversion. When the brand stalls, when the cycle turns, so, rates are going down, right? So what's that going to do to my CD campaign? Well, I'm going to have to redo 25 different assets that show 4.3, and they're all going to become 3.9. So that's a hassle. So my entire creative group has to kind of refocus on a bunch of stuff. And yeah, we use AI. I mean, we've automated this. If this was 5 years ago, it would be, much longer. But when the cycle turns, when rates change, the engine stalls. And then the CFO looks at you and says, hey, marketing guy, hey, marketing woman, we're losing because, SoFi has a better rate. And if you're not in the top 10, if you're not in the top 25%, you don't even show up on the rate aggregators. And if you don't show up on the rate aggregators, you're not even in the game. So why are you spending 40% of your total budget on lower funnel performance? Are people following me when I talk on this? Okay, it's anyway, this is what I'm going to talk about. So, seared versus sustained. So this is a lovely looking scallop. It's a little early in the day for me, but I love this stuff. But it's basically about flash versus finish. So it's become sort of academic now that if you're in marketing, you're basically doing a lot of short-term stuff. I got this 30 days, I got a lot of clicks, I brought in 30 million in the high yield product, I brought in 42 million in my 6-month CD, but then, oh my gosh, rates are lowered, and then I'm being told by executive management that that basically the spread between what we're paying for the money and what we're offering to our clients has gotten really narrow. So all of a sudden, I look like I'm an idiot because I did this big push to get in all those CD dollars. Brands optimize for preferences because they're easy to measure. This is a big point. So I was showing you those photos of the people, right? And the sort of faces and the emotionals. Preferences means I was talking about a bias towards using your iPhone, or an old guy wants to come in and talk to a banker. He wants that assurance. A woman comes in and she thinks her whole deal is kind of scrambled, but it turns out she's actually got a ton of smarts and she's doing smart things, but she wants the validation from a banker. She wants the validation. Gen Xers want things to be fast and simple, but they also want them to be really, really professional, and they don't want to have to pay extra for it. But preferences of how people behave with media, how people behave with financial service products are very, very ephemeral, and they're not deep enough. So if you build your strategy around what people like, you will forever chase trends. And this leads back to my point about the brand being a sort of, if the brand isn't an anchor, if the brand isn't something strong that you can believe in, and you can go to your executive huddle and say, guys, women, I want to remind you what our brand stands for, how we curate it, how we manage it, how we steward it, and how we express that brand in different product sets to different audiences, large corporate, regional commercial, private bank, wealth management, consumer, small business. If you can't do that, like in your sleep, you're probably not in the right job. And I'm really serious. You got to see the forest to be able to understand the trees. You got to see the trees to be able to understand the bark. You constantly have to be able to get back to the top of the house and say, this is who we are. This is the meaning, I'll use Flagstar, the meaning of Flagstar, and this is how we extract that meaning and we deliver it into these different business lines to these different, whether they're age-banded groups or behavioral groups. So this is kind of how I feel I am a lot of the time. I think my posture is a little better than the guy, but we're just all sort of running around like I'm a zombie. I'm looking at this data. I'm being told by all these engineer types, this is my data, these are my audiences. This audience likes streaming, they like this kind of thing. We're doing all sorts of search. We're constantly reinventing and reinvesting in different kind of search strategies. Somebody comes along and says, I'll give you a really good example. One of the executives that I work for is, well, I won't use his name, but we were talking about regional commercial, okay? So he said, hey, I have this idea. And if you're a survivor in marketing like I am, when an executive, and I really respect this guy, he's really smart, and he's really experienced, when he has an idea, it generally means like, I'm gonna really pay attention, I'm gonna like open up a new card and write down what he says. He said, most of our customers travel. His prospective customers, they travel and they go to airports. What about airport advertising? And I'm like, not only are you a respected and dignified, successful executive, but you are so smart. I said, yeah, that's a great idea. And I actually said, I used to live in Denmark. I worked for a bank called Saxo Bank. Has anybody here ever heard of Saxo? There we go. It's a big currency trading. I lived in Denmark because my son was in the Royal Danish Ballet, and I had to move there and give up my whole American life. And I lived there for 7 years, and I was the CMO of Saxo Bank. We did all of our advertising outside of our digital on airports. Because 100% of our clients, anyone who wasn't a Danish client, and most of our clients were abroad, were traveling. They were always in airplanes and always in airports. If you've been to Europe, you realize these airports are like 55-minute ride, travel away. It was a great idea. So that's an example of and it's such an obvious idea as I'm talking about airport and digital out-of-home airport, but that's a way to kind of look at the sort of, solidified, very sort of strict way that engineers will tell you to look at the world of search engines and so forth, rate aggregators and so forth, and look at different things that you can do mid and upper funnel, in this case, digital out-of-home in airports. But we become zombies because we're basically just on a treadmill. We're doing the same thing over and over. Every generation has its own preference set, preferred aesthetic, and I think something, like I'm very design-oriented, and I'm a writer, and I'm a corporate guy who understands banking and finance. We confuse aesthetics for behaviors. Right? We confuse aesthetics for behaviors. We confuse sort of, I use the word technological vernacular. We confuse that for how people want to behave. I've made several references to different generations that really like people, because most people want validation, right? Most people don't say, oh, this is awesome. I've got $100,000, but I got my bonus. I have $92,000 sitting in my checking account. I'll just choose from these different online digital investment companies. And I'm a big fan of online digital investment, even though I really prefer my face-to-face advisor. I'll go with Betterment. I'll go with Wealthfront. I'll move my 92 over there, no problem. People don't really do that. People want some sort of human interaction. They want to call the guy, they want to see the woman. They want to know that what they're doing is something that's not a total bonehead mistake. They want to know that the institution exists, is rated, is populated by real people. It's not just algorithmic programmatic trading. Maybe it has a little human overlay. So this preferred technological vernacular is kind of a bit of it's a bit of a misleading thing, because people are really looking for a brand that they're going to say, you know what, that's coming from, and I'm going to use Neuberger Berman just because I work there. It's coming from this well-established brand, White Shoe Firm, 1939. George Herbert Walker IV runs it. Stable, wonderful. I don't know why I'm plugging Neuberger Berman, but I spent a lot of time there and really enjoyed building that brand. CMOs is what you're dealing with. You're basically dealing with your little Poindexter who says, show me the numbers, show me the numbers, show me the numbers. And they're all short term. And then when the first thing that happens when the wind turns is they say, well, let's cut the marketing budget. So part of the job that we all have as marketing people is really defining and proving that marketing at the brand level, at the upper funnel level, validates the spend. Because if you're not spending at the upper funnel, your lower funnel work is going to be very, very compromised. So my point here, short cycles, fast pivots, flaring and fading channels. These are just participles. I love to throw in stuff like that. And trendy tastes. Your brand should be a reliable marker. So I'm just going to go back to what I said 5 minutes ago. You should be able, whether it's just to a friend, a roommate, a spouse, a partner, or ultimately to your executive huddle, you should be able to articulate the whole story of your brand, how it works in your different lines of business, and how it works for different, let's say, age groups or audiences or persona, without stumbling over yourself, without sounding like you really don't know what you're doing. You should be able to come in and say, Flagstar is a leading regional commercial bank. We value single point of contact. Our bankers are extremely fluent in commercial and financial structures, investment banking, commercial lending, and banking. And this is how it reveals itself in these different places. However, most of us spend a lot of time in this. It's this trap, right? I mentioned to you every morning I get 5 emails showing me what the clicks look like, how we're doing, how many people opened accounts, how many people clicked, got to a website, started the online process, didn't abandon the online process, opened an account, and funded an account. And as I said, you can have a whole department of people who spend their whole careers doing that. But iteration without imagination really blocks you in a cage. So this is sort of my last point. I think about brands as like a coherent system. The brand and I'm going to say the 25 words, and I spend a ton of time thinking about those 25 words because most of the salespeople I work with, and my whole focus, FYI, is on helping salespeople produce. Because if salespeople produce, they're going to say, this guy Darst in marketing is awesome, and his team is awesome, because it's true. Not that we're awesome, but because it's about generating revenue for your organization. It's a coherent system. I want people to be able to tell the story. I want them to be proud. I want them to be able to walk into a meeting, an impromptu meeting, a structured meeting, and be able to tell the story the way I sort of think it works. So I'm going to do a quick pivot. Hey, this is a mistake. I'm spelling this. So when I was speaking at the Financial Brand Conference in Vegas, was anybody there and hear me speak there? There we go. One of the things I said, and this generated a lot of people really anxious. When I said it, I said, I never took a marketing course, and you can probably tell because I'm probably not that smart, and I never took a business course. Everything I learned, I was a classics major, everything I learned about marketing, I learned from salespeople. And people were like, dude, that's crazy, like seriously, like aren't salespeople gross? And I was like, no, they're the best. I love salespeople, and I stopped playing golf, but I really like to socialize the way salespeople socialize. When I started at Smith Barney, one of the first things, I had a great boss, and she was basically head of the whole thing, Smith Barney Asset Management. She said, go travel around with these different salespeople. They were wholesalers. We were selling funds and managed accounts. And she said, listen to how they talk, listen to what they do, get the hang of what this deal is. And I did, and I was this young guy. And I'd go and I'd sort of sit in the back of the room and I'd listen. And I took notes and I absorbed. And that's how I actually developed as a marketing person, was paying attention to what salespeople were doing. And it really had made a difference, made a huge difference for my career. So not that I'm here to give you advice as much as just talk. My advice is really pay attention to your sales guys, because that's, first of all, they're the ones who are really paying your check. They're the ones who you're really engaged to make look good, to help. What else did I want to say about that? Yeah, it's really important. I remember sometimes, like this is particularly when I was at Citigroup, and sometimes, and these like really charismatic sales guys, you know, who are making like $1 million, and I was making like nothing. They'd be like, hey, I've got this idea for Daniel here. And my boss would be like, hey, just shut up. like that's not your job. Your job is to have 5 clean white shirts and pressed suits in your suitcase and to go around. She wouldn't say just shut up. She'd be like, oh, okay. And then he'd say, like, I think we should have like a big picture. And then be like, okay, that's fine. But what I was doing is I was just trying to understand in a meeting with a salesperson what they were saying, how the audience, how the prospect was responding, what kind of questions they asked. If there were material examples, you know, like a one-pager or a brochure, this is like early internet, you know, websites, we'd always be getting to our website, you know, how people, what would they look for on the website, you know, that kind of thing. So I just want to make that point. Yeah, so these are just these clever expressions I like. So I think of the brand as a stability mechanism. And if your brand changes a lot, then you probably got a problem, you have an inherent problem. This is one of my favorite slides. 4 different people have 4 different points of view. You could say, well, they're all 32 years old, they're all middle class, they all have white-collar jobs. But you get a totally different response, whether it's a survey or they're responding to an offer or they're part of a focus group or they're giving you information. You know, unless you're really covering the whole world, it's very, very hard to develop where you are. Brands built on principles and anchor ideas stay relevant across generations. So my closing insight, and then if people have questions, I like that too. You build a brand for 5 generations, of course. You recognize that people are going to respond to technology, they're going to respond to offers, they're going to respond to aesthetics, what I call technological vernacular, in different ways. But the stability of your brand is something that people can always come back to. They understand, they feel good about being part of your brand. Like look at a millennial. A millennial like buys a ton of stuff, tons of impulse. I have a millennial child. I feel millennial. I buy a ton of total garbage stuff online. But if it comes to, you know, and I have no problem, but if it comes to something serious, I want a lot of attention. I want to talk to somebody who knows more than I do, right? So we all have these foibles. So that's kind of it. Daniel Darst, Deputy CMO at Flagstar. I will be at Financial Brand Expo again this April. Those of you who are going to be out there, I look forward to seeing you. Thank you. And questions?
Raise your hand, and the microphone will come.
Come on, don't be shy. I just revealed a ton of stuff.
That's a
Yes.
question.
How do you measure brand?
Well, you're really trying to measure the lift of, so the control, the technical, the specific response is you want to have a control where you're offering a product in a geography or in a demographic that doesn't have brand advertising going on at the same time. And then you want to have an experiment where you're offering the same product, but you have the upper funnel. This is how we do it at Flagstar and how I did it previously at Peoples and M&T. So you're basically saying with the brand, we had a 10% lift in lower funnel production over a 6-month period. Now, there are lots of soft ways to do it. We always want to do brand health trackers, you know, awareness, recognition is a consideration set. But the most specific way is you have a control group and you have, with no brand advertising, and you have brand advertising. And you're looking for the lift over a 6 to 9 month attribution period. When you do advertise brand, I would recommend, my recommendation is just, you know, experience-based, about 20 to 25% of your budget to upper funnel. Great question. Someone else? Yeah. Let your booming voice ring out. It's okay.
Thank you. I think
You talked about consistency and building a brand over generations. What's your read on, I think even in the last year, some of the high-profile, iconic brands that have completely rebranded, completely changed logos, changed brand positioning, changed pretty much all of their architecture. Some of them maybe arguably successful, some of them receiving backlash. Like, have they messed with a principle that they should not have messed
Yeah,
with?
yeah, it's like crazy, right? Like, what are they doing? So that's how I feel. And I'm not just talking about I'm not talking about Cracker Barrel. I just mean broadly. It's like
Jaguar was another one.
Jaguar. So I have a bunch of friends who are heavy designers, and we're like, the thing isn't even balanced. You know, the way the Jaguar leaps off the R of the R. I think it's ridiculous. My dream job, and I'm always looking for the dream job, is to be hired by a bank or a financial or whatever that has a great brand. And then you get to like milk the brand, nurture the brand, steward the brand. I was at a dinner, kind of one of these CMO kind of dinner things the other night. And like everybody's like, I have been in my job for 30 days and I have to make a new brand, a new website. And I'm like, dude, you are so off track. Like, I mean, maybe it's a brand new company. But to answer your question, an iconic brand needs respect. And if you're no one's going to remember you as a great marketer. No one's going to remember me as a great marketer. Your job is to take something that's good and support it. They're not going to be like, oh, boy, that Daniel Darst, he came and just cleaned up the marketing. That's never going to happen. It's going to be about the company. So you're there to make the company work. I mean, I became a corporate guy because I realized I could suppress my ego enough to be part of something bigger than me. So that's a kind of heavy answer for you, but I really feel that way. Usually somebody asks me what my favorite financial service brand is. Does anyone ask me that?
What's your favorite financial service brand?
It's the one I work for. And I'll leave you with that. That should be your answer, guys. You should love the brand you work for. You should do everything you can to make that brand shine, sing, articulate a story. That's what it's all about. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Daniel.